Здравейте, вие гледате предаването без...
Hello and welcome to No Format. UFOs through the eyes of a policeman is this week's topic. Our guest is Gary Heseltine. He served 20 years as a police detective. He is one of the principal investigators of the Rendlesham Forest incident. He served in the Royal Air Force and several nuclear bases. In 2002, Heseltine created the police reportings of the UFO Sightings database. He is also an author of UFO Magazine, which publishes materials of leading UFO research.
More than 30 years you document encounters between police officers and UFOs and so on. So, in fact, you're a detective investigator too. What are the most unmistakable facts that can stand even in court, for example?
I look at evidence the way it would need to be presented in a court of law. There are only three types of evidence in a court of law. Oral, when somebody is a witness. Documentary, when something is written down. And physical evidence, if you think of a murder, the knife, the gun, the baseball bat, the weapon. They are physical things. So oral, written, and physical.
So you work only with that kind of...
That's what I apply to the UFO subject. And if you look at the best cases from all around the world, when you look at, say, military pilot encounters, civilian pilot encounters, astronaut encounters, cosmonaut encounters, radar specialists, air traffic controllers, very credible people in their everyday work, when they see UFOs, that leads to a lot of data in terms of written records, audio recordings, and often it produces video, etc., etc. These are things that we would, in any other subject, accept as evidence in a court of law.
What are the most impressive reports?
For me, my favourite UFO cases are military pilots, because they have millions of dollars spent on their flight training. They usually fly many different types of aircraft. They are familiar with the night sky. They are familiar with terrestrial aerial objects. So when they chase things that move in the blink of an eye, when they go straight up, straight down, right angle turns, thousands of miles an hour, if they don't know what they're looking at, we have to say that it's from somewhere else.
What makes you think that the UFO make research on Earth?
Because for many, well, there are two ways of looking at this. Many people will be aware of the ancient astronaut theory, Erich von Däniken, those chariots of the gods. There is a lot of evidence, circumstantial evidence, to say that the petroglyphs, rock art from thousands of years ago, show people or show creatures wearing helmets that do not look anything like humans all around the world, very similar in all cultures around the world, to say that probably in our distant past there have been many visitations by ET, extraterrestrials, to this planet. In fact, there would be a certain number of people who would say that maybe human DNA has been manipulated to make us what we are now. Crick, the founder of the DNA molecule, the double helix, he said that he believed that we have had an extraterrestrial intervention. He actually said that. He said there has been like a sideways insertion into our DNA, an upgrade, which is now why we are intelligent, conscious, able to think in different ways. So maybe there was a human species here already, and many, many hundreds of thousands of years ago, E.T. came along and upgraded us so we became more intelligent.
What they made us? Why?
Well, I think when you talk about an E.T. agenda, I think there are many species coming here. I think most are probably good, but some are not so good. If you are familiar with the animal mutilation all around the world, then clearly if you are an animal getting dissected and killed, that's not good for the animal. But there are also some human mutilation cases where the same kind of injuries and similar organs being removed have happened. So again, that's very, very nasty. So clearly there appears to be some kind of genetic program going on by at least one species. However, there's a strong correlation between UFOs, ET, and their interest in nuclear weapons. And I suspect that is, and this goes back to the development of the first atomic bomb. So for the last, since 1944-45, UFOs have been monitoring the Earth. When we detonate our first atomic weapon, it sends a shockwave out into space that then notifies other civilizations that the human race has reached a certain level of technology, enabled to create fusion, to create the atomic weapon. So that, I think, signaled to ET that we've reached a certain level of technology. In terms of the world that ufology operates in, we can only live in what's called the public domain, when witnesses tell us that we can investigate. But most of the time, 90% of the knowledge of UFOs is in the secret world, of governments, intelligence agencies. America historically has ran the subject worldwide on UFOs. So the Americans, 90% secret world, the public, 10%.
All the aliens come to the light, they're gonna rotate our world, you know?
They will change the order of the Earth.
Well, you know, I see what you're getting at. One of the fundamental questions as to why the evidence of ET is not told to everyone is the effect on economics, the effect on religions. But there, maybe after the Second World War, there was good reason to keep it secret. But I think after the fall of the Soviet Union in 1991, that was the time when the Americans and the Russians really should have revealed that ET has been here and is interacting with planet Earth.
Let's talk a little more about you. What can make an investigator, a detector, to start interested in UFOs then? Do you have something special?
It's simple. When I was 16 years old, I had a sighting of a UFO. And that briefly involved, I was with my then girlfriend. It was at night, and we saw a bright white light, no distinct shape, but no noise. And what made it interesting is that as the object passed by us, all the housing, there was a power failure. All the electricity went off. So darkness. Over there, the power was on. The object moved towards that. The light went off. The electricity went off. 2 power cuts. And then finally, I had my bicycle, and I rode on my bicycle to my home. So I had moved from my original location to a second geographical location. The object came over my house, power out for the third time. How can I predict that the power would go off? I put my arm up in the air, and as soon as it went past my arm, all the electricity went out. How can I predict? That's ridiculous. So I knew then that that object, whatever it was, having moved to a second position, must have been the thing that caused the power to go off.
Yes, but that can be made man-made, you know. Before we wasn't aware about EMPs.
Yes, but how can I predict a power cut to the very second? I had moved, it comes over my rooftop, I put my arm in the air. As soon as it goes past the 90 degrees, the power goes out. How can I predict a power cut? So that says that the object, having moved from one location to a second location, was the common denominator and must have triggered it to that second.
Do you heard similar stories of different people like yours for that kind of object?
There have been many cases where electricity has gone off. In fact, in 1965, over the eastern side of the United States, UFOs were attributed to causing a massive blackout of power that lasted for about 8 hours and affected New York, and millions of people were in darkness for about 6 or 8 hours, and that's believed to have been a UFO event triggering the power failure. Similar, if you think to the scene in Close Encounters of the Third Kind, the movie, the Hollywood film, where very early on you see the actor Richard Dreyfuss on a hill looking down over the city, and the power goes off, bit by bit by bit, because of UFO. Very simple.
You've published a book named UFO Through the Eyes of Police Officers.
Right, okay, no, it's in 2002, whilst I was still a serving police detective, I created an unofficial national database for British police officers to record their UFO sightings and collate others historical. And since that time, I now have over 550 police cases, going back to 1901, involving over 1,100 police officers who have gone on the record, have been named, have been involved in UFO events. That is how I became known within the UFO subject, because people then began to ask me to talk about my police cases, and so I began to do lectures.
What people think about your work with UFO and at the beginning, when you start to work on the team?
When I was still a serving police officer, my colleagues thought I was crazy. Some of them. When you spoke to them alone, many were impressed by what I was doing. But when you put police officers together, they tend to make a joke of it. But one-to-one, in a conversation one-to-one, they were impressed with what I was doing.
Does that mean that the society become ready to talk about that?
No, there's very good reasons why people have a dismissive attitude, and that boils down to the Americans. Are you familiar with the Robertson Panel? Are you familiar with the Robertson Panel?
A little bit.
What year was the Robertson Panel?
Well, I've read a little more about that, and I can explain it.
I won't press you. Right. What you have to understand is that America, Roswell was real. They did recover a UFO, ET, a craft. I do believe that. And that changed a lot of things. It made America the most dominant nation on the earth, because anybody who could try to reverse engineer that technology would be thousands of years the rest of the world. So they became in a sense, the keepers of the knowledge, which was wrong, in my opinion, but they did. So America have dominated the subject ever since. In 1953, the Robertson Panel was a team of scientists under a professor called Professor Robertson, and he assembled a team of other scientists, different biologists, physicists, chemists, etc. But their idea was to strip the fascination that people, the public, had with flying saucers. That was the term used then, flying saucers. So in the 1950s, it wasn't UFO, it was flying saucers, was the term that the ordinary people used. And ordinary people were interested, fascinated by these reports. So the CIA, the Central Intelligence Agency, created the Robertson Panel in 1953, and its aim was to strip the fascination of the public of flying saucers. How could they do that? So the way they did that was to say, we will engage with all forms of media, TV, radio, books, newspaper, film, and say it's nothing to this subject. We will debunk, make fools of everyone who believes in flying saucers. And so everybody born in this world after 1953 has lived in an era of debunking. That is why people laugh about flying saucers.
Do you still believe that they work about that?
Yes,
with the movies?
It is still going on, but as technology changes, they will not be able to keep this secret for much longer. The mass communications of mobile phones, Facebook live streaming, means that sooner or later we are going to get a really good UFO event in 4K HD on somebody's mobile phone, and they will live stream it around the world before governments can prevent and contain the problem.
When you have any doubts about the truth of the reports that you work with?
No, not at all. In all the 16 years of my research in the public world, maybe only 2% I've thought of the people I've spoken to were lying. 98% sincere, genuine. That's not to say they cannot be mistaken, because many are. They genuinely believe they've seen something odd, but it turns out after investigation that it's not. But in your high caliber witness categories, it's very different. If you study pilot reports who have received the best training, they know what to look for in the sky, they know about stars, sundogs, moon anomalies, sun anomalies, etc., etc. When you study the very best pilot cases, the percentage of error from the pilot is less than 5%. So that means 95% of every pilot that says he's seen an object do all these kind of things is genuine. And that forms the best kind of evidence, because with that you will have radar data, telemetry data from the instruments, you may have multiple aircraft, you may have multiple air-ground radar to corroborate that this incident was taking place involving many, many aircraft, etc.
Did anybody tell you stories about abduction of UFO?
Abductions, yes, and I've done some abduction research, but I don't consider myself to be an expert in the abduction field. I know a lot of people who are. However, one of the police cases that I dealt with early on was a very famous case from 1980 and involving a policeman called Godfrey. And I investigated his case for about 18 months on and off. I spoke to all his friends, family, fellow police officers, and he was a very famous, it's a very famous case because he is recognised as being Britain's first abductee case in 1980. There are others who've since claimed to be, but he didn't. He hit the media. He went worldwide. His case was well known around the world.
Would you tell us that story? What happened to that man?
I do lectures on it, so it's a long story. But briefly, he was driving his police car. He goes around a corner, and there in the road ahead of him is a flying saucer, UFO, hovering just above the road, 5 feet off the ground, blocking the road. So he stops. He tries to go for his personal radio. The radio is dead. He then goes for his main radio set. The radio is dead, so he can't tell anyone. He has a sketch plan, piece of paper. He draws the UFO. Then something strange happens. Then there is a time jump. He's driving down the road. It's gone. He goes back. He finds a circular patch of twigs, branches, because the object was rotating centrifugal force. It was November of 1980. So trees and branches had formed, and leaves had formed a circular pattern where the object had been hovering in the road. The time jump was established because he was then abducted in that moment and then put back in the car, further up the road, 100 metres further down the road, under hypnosis 4 times, 3 of which were on video. He was asked questions by 2 professors from Manchester University, and he was attached to equipment monitoring his heart responses, and he basically said that the car was engulfed in a bright white light. This is the missing time piece. He found himself lying down on like a bed, and small creatures about 3 to 4 feet high, size of a child, were putting equipment on his legs. And he described them as lamp heads, bulb heads, like a bulb for a light, a bulb, big eyes. And this was before the X-Files and the iconic Whitley Strieber Communion iconic alien grey head. So this was before then. Okay, and basically he was examined, and when the professor started to ask more detailed questions, he got very agitated on each occasion, and they had to stop the interview because his heart rhythm was, it was like he was not allowed to respond. He'd been told not to answer the questions, so they had to end the interviews. But it's a very famous case in Britain, and I met him and got to know him as a friend over an 18-month period, and if he is lying, he deserves an Oscar, a Hollywood Oscar, if he's lying.
What you know about the aliens on Earth? Is there aliens on Earth?
I don't know for certain. Nobody does in the public world, because we only have 10% of the knowledge. However, in the secret world, the 90%, I suspect they know for certain. I suspect the Americans know for certain if there is contact. But that's the secret world. And unless you are in that secret world, you will never have what's called the need to know. You won't have the classification authority to get to know that information. So, I do suspect that there has been contact of some kind, especially through the Americans. Have we recovered bodies? Yes, I think we have, because bodies were allegedly found at Roswell, at least 2, some say 3, and recovered. 2 were supposedly dead at the scene. One may have been alive. But this is all theory, speculation. I like to deal with the real evidence. So this is why I concentrate on the 10% that we do know. And in the 10% that we do know, we can say that 2,500 military pilots worldwide have gone on the record. 2,500 fighter jet pilots have gone on the record with UFO encounters. 3,000 civilian airline pilots have gone on the record worldwide. Hundreds of radar operators, hundreds of air traffic controllers all around the world, hundreds of submarine sonar operators. So you get a lot of underwater UFOs. UFOs are seen going in and out of water, large oceans, lakes. Why? We don't know. Maybe the Americans know. But in the public world, this is what creates the hardcore of evidence that I work from. That's often backed up with photographs, telemetry data, witness testimony, thousands and thousands and thousands of many good cases over the last 75 years.
So the words of this pilot mean that our sky never has been only our.
No, I think that's exactly. And are you aware of the Pentagon admissions? Are you aware of the Pentagon admissions?
No, no.
You should be. I will talk about them in my lecture, briefly. In December of last year, December the 16th, 2017, a former member of the Pentagon secret program on UFOs, an American called Luis Elizondo, went public at a press conference and said that with the authority of the Pentagon, so official American authority, that there were things flying in our airspace, the American airspace, that were far technologically superior to anything that America had. Did you know that? No. You should have known that. The press do not report properly.
What we are seeing is something that is not traditional aircraft. It's not a drone.
We're talking about unidentified flying objects.
A $22 million effort to document and research UFOs.
The Pentagon ended funding, but the New York Times reports the program remains in existence.
That is an admission that they can never go back from. This was the Pentagon saying that there are exotic flying machines flying around in the US airspace that are far more technologically advanced. They move in ways that defy anything that we can explain. So that's an admission that would stand up in a court of law. They can never go back from December of 2017. They also said that they had recovered materials, which they called meta-materials. What he meant by that was materials from UFOs. Composition of metals, etc., that had been sent for analysis. Okay? And what the analysis shows us that these are known elements, but they are put together in alloys that mankind can't do, have never done. So these were amazing admissions. And so from now on, after December 2017, if a person says, what evidence is there for UFOs? Any person who knows the subject should say, December the 16th, 2017, they admitted these things are flying around and they don't know what they are. That's what they're telling us.
You said that 90% of UFO cases are classified. Why the authorities do that?
Do you drive a car?
Sometimes.
Okay.
I'm not a good driver.
Most cars run on either petrol, diesel.
Yes.
At this moment in time.
That's right.
And the oil companies make millions and billions of dollars and become very rich.
Yes.
If you invented a car that ran on fresh air,
it would be cheaper, very cheap.
So they lose their power. So the main reason why UFOs existence has not been told to the public is because petrochemical, pharmaceutical. Can you imagine that if they admit that ET is here and has been around for 50, 60 years, that they don't use petrol, they use electromagnetic gravity, anti-gravity, so they don't need fossil fuels anymore. You could have free energy. All the companies, the multinational companies, would lose all their profits and they would not be powerful anymore. So they do not want that secret to get out. It's about loss of power. Does America want to admit? People say the president can stand on the White House lawn and make a big declaration and say UFOs are real. But if he did that, he is then admitting that they're not in charge of the airspace, which is effectively what they did in December last year. But the world and the media are involved in the cover-up. A lot of it through ignorance. People like you do your job properly. You do not know all the full facts. So you're ignorant but a part of the cover-up. Many TV companies do not tell the truth. They don't openly lie. I've worked with many TV companies. They make entertainment. Entertainment is not necessarily all the facts. So what they do and what television does in the Western world is tell you some of the facts about UFOs, but not all of the facts. And only if you have all of the facts can you really make a determination. They don't give you the full story.
Why the 3% of the cases remain unexplained?
That is a general view that ufologists will accept. 95% of everything ever reported worldwide as a UFO, in the end it turns out to be 5% that are mysterious, that can be investigated, and then when you investigate into that 5%, you can maybe rule out another 2%. But you are left with 3% after investigation, that defy explanation. So that 3% of millions of cases since 1945. So work out 3% of millions of cases, and you end up with many tens of thousands of very good cases.
Why you think that the Blue Book project put the U over people's eyes? I mean that it lied people.
People didn't realize at the time that it was a public relations exercise. It was never a proper investigation. It began with Project Sign, that then became Project Grudge, that eventually became Project Blue Book. And Blue Book ended technically in 1970, but most people would say 69 was when the last investigations were done. Okay, and the reason why it closed was the Air Force wanted to stop questions about UFOs. So how could they do that? So they create a sham organization to say that we're going to do a big review of all the best evidence called the Condon Committee. A physicist, a very eminent physicist called Edward Condon, and he ran the Condon Committee, but it was designed to get rid of UFOs. They wanted to debunk, like the Robertson Panel. They wanted to stop people asking questions because they didn't want to give the answers. So in the end, they got this Condon Committee to examine supposedly all of the evidence, but out of 12,000 cases on the Blue Book files, they only looked at 104 files. And on that, they determined there's nothing to this. Everything can be explained. If you actually read the data, 30% of the cases that they examined couldn't be explained. But they gave their conclusion first at the press conference. Isn't that a bit strange? When you go into a press conference, you've got all the world watching. Normally you'd present your evidence and then present your conclusions at the end. But they didn't. They said there's nothing to this from the start. So most of the The reporters walked out. But within the body of data, 30% of the 104 cases they looked at were unexplained. So how can there be nothing to this? It was a joke. It was a joke.